Hello, everybody. Jane Adams, and I'm speaking to you from Sydney, unfortunately. I'm afraid I wasn't able to make it to the conference, but we are going to have a great chat today with Angela, many of whom you know. Just first of all, big call out to a couple of people in the room who go back as far as I do in terms of the history of farmers markets in New Zealand, because I think Ian Thomas and Jenny Crum are going to be in the audience when this chat is played. So if Angela and I get something not quite right in the terms of history of farmers in New Zealand, you can ask either Ian Thomas or Jenny for their versions. And if you've got questions about matters that Angela and I are going to talk about, you can always ask both of them for their input. Some of you might know that I was involved in the establishment of farmers markets in New Zealand a long time ago from the get-go, and pivotally with Ian as one of the people. But one of the other people who was important in the establishment of farmers markets in New Zealand was in fact now Sir Graham Avery, who was involved in the Hawke's Bay Food Group at the time. And that led, one thing and another, to my coming to New Zealand in 2006 to run a workshop in Hawke's Bay with Ian and others that led to the establishment of the Hawke's Bay Farmers Market, which I was really lucky to visit not so long ago. And in the context of nostalgia, Ian and I took a walk through the Hawke's Bay Farmers Market, and it was incredibly gratifying to me to see that all these years later, that Hawke's Bay Farmers Market is actually thriving on the lawn on Sunday mornings. It was quite a special moment. I met Angela originally when I ran a farmers market workshop in the Barossa Valley. And she's, of course, gone on to much bigger and greater things and is now a very important person in the sustainable food movement in New Zealand and has her own business as well. And I don't know whether Angela remembers this, but we were in the Barossa and we were looking at a possible location for the Barossa Farmers Market, and there were three towns sort of effectively in a triangle. And when I sort of worked out early on, I think that if we put it in any one town, it wasn't going to be hugely workable for the community. So we actually found the vintners' sheds and the market, that Barossa market, is still trading in exactly the same location as we identified back then. I would now like to hand over to Angela, who's going to ask me a few questions, so it's really just a chat, so that we go back over some of the background to the farmers market movement in New Zealand, and then look forward a little bit into, well, I was going to say crystal ball, but these days it's probably a kombucha bottle, to have a look and see, where things are at. So over to you, Angela. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Kia ora koutou, ko Angela Clifford toku ingoa. And as Jane mentioned, I am involved still with food in New Zealand. I lead a not-for-profit food movement called Eat New Zealand, and that we are all about reconnecting people with where their food comes from. And as Jane mentioned, I've been involved with farmers markets for pretty close to 25 years now, both in Australia and New Zealand. And I established the Barossa Farmers Market and came across to New Zealand not long afterwards, and was actually the vice chair of Farmers Markets New Zealand for my sins for a while, alongside Ian and Jenny. And helped to establish our local farmers markets. So as I've sort of moved away from farmers markets specifically and into the bigger food system, I've always taken farmers markets with me, understanding how powerful and important they are in terms of thriving local food systems. So when Jane reached out and said, do you want to have a chat? I jumped at the opportunity because I believe that the work that FMNZ does is absolutely important to the future of food in New Zealand. And Jane is a stalwart and an early adopter of this type of way of better connecting eaters and producers. So it's really wonderful to be here with you, Jane. Kind of here with you
Yeah, I wish
online.
it was a bit closer.
There would be wine, that's for sure. Anyway, I wanted to start by asking you a question. And actually, it's one I've always wanted to ask you, and I don't think I ever have. But what is it about farmers markets that so captured your attention and has effectively been a huge part of your career?
Well, it was an accidental part, I have to say. I had a couple of farming uncles. One was a dairy farmer, one was a grazier. I spent school holidays milking cows. Yes, I can milk a cow. And doing other farm things. I was also later in my life a journalist, and I was involved, particularly interested in food and the food scene that came through journalism. And I went to a food conference in Melbourne and realised when an American author popped up and said, you've got great produce, as he called it, but you don't have farmers markets, why not? That led me to apply for the fellowship that I actually secured in 97 and to the workshops that I started to run out after I'd been in America on a research trip to look into farmers markets and what made them tick and how they should be established. That was done in 98, and the first farmers market, because I established a workshop model to roll out for communities, and those first workshops, I held those the first one in 99 in New South Wales. But it was, my personal interest came out of an interest in food, I guess an interest in people, and that background, my childhood background. I'm a city girl but with country roots or something, and it's still there, hasn't changed.
And when you say that it hasn't changed, has your work evolved from where it was when you started giving those workshops? For example, for us as a community in the Barossa Valley, has your understanding or what you have sort of evolved into changed over those times in terms of what you offer and what you talk about now?
Well, the roles changed slightly because there are now over 200 farmers markets in Australia, and I don't routinely now run workshops like I did in what I would call the establishment phase of farmers markets, essentially. And I did run 8 workshops originally in New Zealand. That was through the foresight of the government department, which was Trade Ends, NZTE, I think. That was very much what I'd call phase 1 of farmers markets as a sector in farming and agriculture and food supply. Phases subsequently evolved. One, to try and maintain authenticity and best practice and recruitment, things like that, in the ongoing evolution of farmers markets. And the other role, which has become, in fact, more significant, and by dint of COVID in large part, and I can come back to that, has been government advocacy. To bring both, and it's more complicated here in Australia than New Zealand, obviously. We've got 3 tiers of government. You've only got, well, I guess you've got 2. You've got your national government and you've got local government. And COVID was very, a good example of the challenges that you face when you are advocating, because that advocacy had to be carried over from the federal situation down to states and then to implementation of COVID-safe practices to keep our markets going. But it wasn't COVID brought government to an awareness in Australia of the role that farmers markets actually play in the food chain. I don't actually think they had any awareness of that before COVID in any real sense. So COVID was actually, if curiously, had a positive side to it for farmers markets. But the advocacy role is the critical one ongoing. I've been on federal ministerial advisory groups on organics, for example, been involved in lower down the chain revision of regulation relating in particular at the moment to leafy vegetables, melons and berries in terms of food safety. So, and we've had a win to some extent there in the drafting of the new regulations for those food groups. So it's much more of an advocacy role than it used to be. And I don't see that changing. I think that's largely the role now.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I mean, fascinating that the establishment phase of farmers markets in New Zealand was supported by our central government, by NZTE, because I don't feel like our central government really understands farmers markets or supports them. There's definitely no mechanism for funding them in any way, shape or form. And it is interesting that Australia had a different outcome than New Zealand did over that COVID period. And really, our farmers markets weren't able to operate at all. And to see the outcome and the difference in terms of profile as a result is so interesting. And it feels like a series of sliding doors through which one country stepped and the other one didn't.
Well, Angela, I don't think we, as in, AFMA representing smaller producers, would have been invited to the Ag Minister's advisory group on organics if it hadn't been for COVID. I think it's that direct connection or a consequence. Farmers markets have been put on the map as a consequence of, a very difficult, challenging time. Yeah. So that's advocacy is probably the main sort of activity, certainly in my role, and generally, I mean, the association's there to help New Start farmers markets, and they are ongoing, as they are, I'm sure, in New Zealand, that there are, people still wanting to start markets.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been involved in regional groups who have been in that position of considering, and I'm really grateful that FMNZ exists and that they have a series of rules that constitutes a farmers market. And I often think back to those early days and how hard it was to stand up those rules and to fight for them. But, with hindsight, I'm really glad that we did and that they exist. And so I do think that FMNZ plays a really important role ongoing as regions and communities step towards that idea of a farmers market. Do you still think about farmers markets in the same way? Do you think their role is changing from when you started?
Basically, no. I think the essence of a truly authentic farmers market is as it was intended, proposed, as I found them in America, because the model that I developed is actually derivative. It's not exactly the same, but it's derivative of what I encountered when I was in the US. I have to say I'm not in a hurry at the moment to go back there to check how they're travelling. But essentially a well-founded farmers market, which the essence of which, and for everybody who's at the conference, I'm sure I'd be preaching to the converted. I mean, the fact that the definitions on the AFMA website, the foundation of that model, which is to say it's farmer direct, and no resellers, all the kind of fundamental underpinnings of that original concept have the proof's in the pudding. I mean, I can name numerous markets in Australia, Albany and these markets are all 20 years old. Barossa, Albany, Wollonga, Harvest in Launceston, and there are many other markets that are very much operating along those original sort of foundational lines. That hasn't changed. In the beginning, I had to say to people, look, go about it this way. And I had to kind of, put my hand on my heart and say, trust me, because there wasn't actually any particular market that you could point to and say, well, they're good, they're a success. Now, I mean, we're talking 20 more years later, the well-founded, authentic farmers markets are actually thumping along. They're trading. I mean, the Hawke's Bay Farmers Market, not that many months ago, was obviously very, very vibrant. And there were even stalls there. Ian explained it to me that the ownership of the stall had changed, but the stall was still there. And that's in terms of trying to set up a sustainable local food supply chain. That's very powerful.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the Barossa Valley is the same, It's absolutely thriving. It's definitely over the years been a roller coaster variously and had its moments, but the structure and the foundation of the market has seen it through those more tenuous moments. Not tenuous in terms of will it survive or not, but tenuous in terms of is the community behind it? Is it reflective of what they want to be? And I think that's super important. So those rules around no resellers, it's a food market, and it's a defined geographical boundary. I wanted to ask you whether you thought there should be any other rules these days. The one that comes to mind for me, perhaps as a discussion starter, is the ratio between ready to eat food and fresh food. Do you think that's a relevant discussion for farmers markets?
It is. You've got to be very careful that you don't have too much ready to eat. Well, it depends on the ready to eat. If it's pasta and it's in a little packet and you're meant to take it home and have it for your dinner, that's okay. If it's ready to eat, as in sink your teeth into a breakfast burger or a bowl of laksa or whatever, in other words, is your market there as a food shopping destination to put food in the fridge for the family, food in the fridge for the family, on a weekly basis, or is it an entertainment? In other words, you're going down there because you do want a bowl of laksa and to hang out with your mates. Now, the point of a farmer's market to be successful, it has to be habitual and a food shopping routine thing to do. It's where you go to buy food for the week, and it stays fresh because it is fresher than where other food you might source. You go there as a food shopping destination activity. The fact that you have a coffee and you have a chat to your neighbour or somebody's, parents from your kid's school or whatever, is all part of the community connection, which is another very vital part of farmers markets in communities, and became very important during COVID because we couldn't go out anywhere, but you could go to the farmers market, you could go shopping. You had stood in a, properly distanced queue, but you could still have conversations. That was at a time when you went to the supermarket and the, poultry section in the supermarket was completely bare on one occasion when I went to check it out specifically. So the point of the fresh is, and the dominance of the fresh perishable food is that you go weekly and that you go there to buy food. You don't go for entertainment, because if people go just for entertainment, they're not going to shop the same way. They might grab a bag of this or a jar of that, but that doesn't sustain the market. And if people want to have, hawker-style food markets, well, that's fine in a community, but not on market morning, because you're at the market because you're there to buy food. And that's what keeps the producers' businesses viable.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was talking to a small region just recently, and they don't have a lot of food producers or small food producers. And I think over my time, over the decades, that's what I'm starting to see a lot more, is that we've lost a lot of our small food producers in New Zealand. And particularly in some sections, like fresh fruit and vegetables. So there's been a consolidation of farms and of businesses. And I put to them the idea that a farmer's market can actually be made up of a very small number of stalls, as long as those stalls are somewhere that people have to come back to every single week. And the ones for me that always stand out are fresh vegetables and a good sourdough bread baker.
You've got
They're
to be able, and Shirley, you've got to be able to put dinner together. So long as the diversity in the market gives you dinner, in other words, some protein, some vegetables,
yeah.
whether bread and cheese and whatever. That's the bottom line. It's got to
Mm.
be able to do that. It's really important.
Because I think often people think in order to start a farmer's market, there has to be 25 stalls, or I don't think that's been my experience. Has that been your experience?
No, I went to one in America. There were 6 stalls. It was in a place called Hartford in Connecticut, and it was right downtown in a kind of town square. And those 6 stalls were flat out busy, and it worked.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be on, massive scale at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. Okay, I think this recording, everybody, we could talk for hours. We're going to have half an hour.
Uh,
About 10 minutes or something, I think.
yeah, cool. So you're here representing Australia National Farmers Market Association, and we're talking to Farmers Market New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what do you think the value is of these national organisations, and what role do you think they should be playing moving forwards?
The role that I've already, in fact, mentioned, it's more and more advocacy.
Mm.
It's writing submissions. There was recent, or not last year, a parliamentary inquiry into food security in Australia. It's putting the small farmer, local, short food chain into the minds of government and regulators to remind others in bigger ag that there's smaller ag actually very importantly happening, and that they ought to be, I think, working together on many issues. I think sometimes the bigger end of agriculture forgets the guys that are growing the lettuces and have the free-range chickens, and they tend to be, and I see that in discussions that relate to policy, that I'm sitting there on these panels when I am continually talking about, hang on, there are small people in agriculture, please don't overlook them. They are the grassroots significant contributors to local food. And in circumstances like we had during COVID, where the food chain broke down, local food is hugely important and mustn't be threatened at any time. And I think the agriculture sector could do more to help itself in the sense of looking after some of the smaller producers. But I think, by and large, it's a matter of still making sure we're talking up all the time to make sure that food supply isn't taken for granted. One of the things we're facing at the moment, the news this morning when I turned it on, and goodness only knows will happen in the Middle East before this conference happens, but the cost of fuel potentially could go through the roof as a consequence of issues in the Middle East. Now, that affects the food chain directly, particularly if the food's being moved around on big trucks. But if you can get it short chain from where it's grown to market on market morning, that food's still going to be there at, roughly speaking, the same cost. Whereas if you've got to put it on a big truck and send it, in the case of Australia, long distances, that food's going to be more expensive if the cost of fuel goes up. That's just one little example that I can think of as to why locally grown, locally bought food is so important.
Yeah, I saw an example in Australia just recently during the big Queensland floods where the supermarket shelves were empty, but the local food cooperative had stacked shelves
Yeah.
and were absolutely smashed with orders because it was the only place in some communities to find food was the local food that existed. And that wasn't even fuel. That was as simple as a flood. And given that we're going to see more of these kind of events, it would seem to me that local food resilience is a no-brainer. And I guess,
COVID and climate are the two sort of drivers of that. I mean, people should be acutely aware from both those instances as to why local food's so important.
and just talking about those moments of disaster or those moments of significant change, can you just give us some more details of what happened in that process as things started to shut down with the COVID lockdowns? And how did Australia convince the government that farmers markets should stay open?
I'd like to say smoke and mirrors, but actually it was a lot of hard work. The advocacy at first stage was to the federal level. The then Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, did list farmers' markets in his exceptions in terms of what could stay trading when he made his original announcements, but in the next breath he said that he was devolving the implementation of the fact that farmers' markets were declared essential to the state governments. So that then meant we had to advocate all over again, multiply, to states across Australia. I take my hat off to the people who did that work. It wasn't just me. There were many people involved in the process. And that hard work has paid off in spades subsequently, as I mentioned before, because farmers' markets suddenly hit the radar with government. It's like, hello, who are these people? And it's had very good residual benefits for farmers' markets generally. I think back before COVID, if government had an idea of farmers' markets, they didn't take them at all seriously. I don't think they understood the power of farmers' markets. And to give you an example, the market in Moruya, so on the south coast of New South Wales, they're one of the older markets and one of the very good ones, and they've done a couple of economic impact surveys. Their market, which trades on a Tuesday afternoon, has put cumulatively their estimate for its impact, and I don't want to give you the wrong figure, I'm just checking that. They have an economic impact of $4 million approx from their last survey per annum into their community. They now have about 40,000 shoppers through that market on a Tuesday afternoon per annum, and they have had 28% increase in sales over the last 5 years. So if we want to kind of finish up on a positive note, that would be a very good example to show how a well-run, authentic farmers market can have amazing impact in its community and for the growers in that region. And at the time when they started, they asked me what I thought about a Tuesday afternoon for a trading time. And I said to them, nobody runs a farmers market in the afternoon. They were the first guys to go with a Tuesday afternoon slot, and look what they've achieved. And, all power to them. and I think it's emblematic of what can be achieved in farmers markets. I really do.
So just to finish then, and you're right, that's a wonderful positive note. Is there a message for New Zealand farmers markets in terms of what the future is and where we should be heading?
Well, I think we've now hit a maturity phase in farmers markets. I was talking about, the establishment phase. Farmers markets, numerous of them are 20 years plus old. There is a need to recruit new market, people in the management of the market. So there are succession plans for the management of the markets, that there is recruitment of younger farmers, stallholders. Most people may not know, but in my other life I've got a bit of an interest in a vineyard, and for 9 years I was on the selling side of the counter at a farmer's market selling wine. I know how draining it is to be there on market morning, and I was doing it twice a month. On market morning for 4 hours or whatever, you need to continue to renew both the market management and the stallholders and the stallholder mix. There needs to be a constant kind of review, passing on of knowledge, recruiting somebody as an understudy market manager, reaching out to younger farmers. That's the stage we're at in the farmers market sector at the moment. It's to be cognizant of the need to constantly recruit and renew to maintain what we've established over the last 20 years.
Awesome. Thanks, Jane. Thanks for your time, and thanks for asking me to come and talk to you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the conference. I'm sorry I'm not there, but I'm thinking I might get a couple of reports. Thanks very much.